The state, or government itself, always seeks the best public policies to benefit society as a whole. At least in theory, this is the role of the government. State intervention in the economy is one of these policies and aims to help companies and the population in general to go through moments of instability and financial crises. But to what extent is state intervention used to help? And to what extent does it prioritize the interests of the population over those of the government and big business owners? In today's video, you will understand a little more about state intervention in the economy, who wins and who loses. But before that, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and leave a like if you like the topic of this video. Also, leave your opinions on state intervention in the comments, and if you think the government should actually do it in the economy. What is state intervention? State intervention in the economy refers to any type of action taken by the state that affects the functioning of the market or the economy as a whole. These actions can be regulatory, fiscal, monetary, or other, and aim to influence the distribution of resources, the production of goods and services, the generation of employment, the concentration of income, and other important aspects for the economy. This intervention normally occurs at different levels, where the government can create policies ranging from fiscal incentives and investments in infrastructure to price regulation and nationalization of companies. Some forms of this intervention include the granting of subsidies, inflation control, the creation of social programs, and regulation of the financial market. An example in Brazilian history is the Manaus Free Trade Zone, which is a free trade area located in the state of Amazonas. Created in 1957, the Free Trade Zone aims to promote the economic development of the Amazon region through the attraction of investments and the generation of employment, and one of its main characteristics is the granting of fiscal incentives for companies that establish themselves in the region. Companies that settle in the Manaus Free Trade Zone can obtain exemption from federal, state, and municipal taxes, as well as other benefits such as reduced electricity and transportation costs. This was a maneuver by the Brazilian government to attract investors and promote development in an area that was previously little explored. State intervention is often justified as a way to promote social welfare, ensure economic stability, and correct market failures, but it can also generate debates and criticisms about its impacts and effectiveness. What are the reasons why state intervention in the economy receives criticism? Well, there are some points that make this a poorly viewed strategy by a large part of society, and the main one is that it can be completely biased, as it usually only helps a small part of the economy at the expense of the rest. These policies are usually created to protect and promote the competitiveness of strategic sectors, encouraging economic growth and generating jobs or correcting social inequalities. An example of an economic policy that benefits a specific sector is the granting of tax incentives for technology or innovation companies. These incentives, like those in the Manaus Free Trade Zone, usually include tax exemptions, tax credits, or reduced rates, for example. These policies aim to stimulate the development of companies that are considered important for the country's economy and for the creation of new jobs. Another example of an economic policy that benefits a specific sector is the granting of subsidies to rural producers. These subsidies can be given in the form of low-interest loans, investments in infrastructure, or technical assistance programs, for example. These policies aim to help maintain agricultural production and preserve economic activity in rural areas, which are often lacking in resources and opportunities. While they bring benefits to the sectors that are directly affected, they can also generate distortions in the economy as a whole, concentrating resources in specific sectors. But there are still other problems. The problems. State intervention in the economy usually comes with partiality on the part of the current management and carries various issues with it. Some interventions may be considered less harmful, such as increased bureaucracy, where state intervention can increase the complexity of regulatory processes, which can harm market efficiency and the development of new ventures. Others cause even greater damage, such as increased corruption, as state intervention can create space for corruption and the creation of favors for certain interest groups, harming transparency and impartiality in the market. The government management responsible for certain interventions may simply start favoring sectors with companies that can bring unfair advantages in future elections, or even promote illicit enrichment through the distribution of these same subsidies to a certain group. As a consequence, this intervention can also generate inefficiency in the management of public resources, as subsidies and tax incentives can negatively affect the state's finances and the quality of services provided to the population. To favor some companies, the government needs to use resources from taxes, which should be invested in health, security, and education, for example. The benefits. Despite all the problems mentioned above, when done correctly, this intervention can bring immense benefits to society as a whole. For this to happen, it is important that it be carried out with well-defined criteria, with the aim of promoting economic development and social welfare, without generating distortions and negative consequences for the market and society in general. An example is the stimulation of innovation, as intervention can be used to encourage research and development of new technologies, through investments in research and development, subsidies, or partnerships with private companies. It can also be used as a way to promote social justice through strategies that establish equal opportunities, thus reducing social inequalities. This can be done through public policies such as income redistribution programs, tax incentives for companies that hire people in vulnerable situations, or quota policies for groups considered as minorities. State intervention in the economy can also be crucial in stabilizing the economy in times of crisis, through policies such as reducing interest rates, increasing public spending, among others, thus helping to avoid prolonged recessions and protecting employment and income for the population. But if state intervention has benefits and problems attached to it, who really wins and who really loses in this situation? Answering this question is not an easy task, since intervention can even be good and bad at the same time, becoming a double-edged sword. And to try to understand a little more, we can cite a recent example. Silicon Valley Bank case. On March 10, 2023, U.S. financial regulators closed Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, after the bank collapsed, marking the second largest bank failure in U.S. history and the largest since the 2008 crisis. This bankruptcy generated panic throughout the country, as Silicon Valley Bank was considered the bank of startups, meaning all the money from technology companies was in this bank. The consequences of the collapse of just one bank could decimate the U.S. economy, which is already going through a post-C-19 recession, as the so-called chain reaction would occur, where the bank collapsing, the startups would be left without money and eventually collapse too, laying off thousands of people. Other companies that provided services to these startups would also go bankrupt, laying off thousands of people. With so many Americans losing their jobs, they wouldn't have money to spend, which would inevitably lead companies like supermarkets, pharmacies, and all local commerce to decrease their revenue, laying off more employees. The situation would escalate in a way that could harm the entire U.S. economy, which, as previously stated, is already going through a recession. That's when the U.S. government decided to intervene, as it cannot simply let the entire country suffer from the chain reaction of a bank failure. U.S. President Joe Biden announced that the Federal Reserve, the U.S. central bank, would guarantee the receipt of money from all Silicon Valley Bank customers, a state intervention in the American economy with an investment valued at over $100 billion. Now I leave a question for you. Did the U.S. government do right or wrong in saving the bank and all its customers with taxpayer money? Leave your answer in the comments. The U.S. government's actions divided opinions. While the majority believe that saving the bank was the best option as it also saved the American economy, experts believe that the government should not intervene in private companies. The main argument is that the bank failed due to poor management through excessive leverage in an attempt to earn more money from its customers' deposits. This sets a precedent in which companies do not need to exercise good management, as when things go wrong, the government will simply save them. Especially large corporations that can, like the Silicon Valley Bank, create a chain reaction that threatens the entire economy of the entire country. Another argument is the fact that if the bank had profits from its investments, it would not share them with the government or even with the population. Therefore, there is no reason for the government to use taxpayer money, paid by all American taxpayers, to save the bank when its commercial activities result in losses. This case only reinforces the fact that state intervention in the economy is a double-edged sword. As much as it is extremely beneficial, saving the economy of a country, it also has its negative side that can hinder, creating precedents for companies to take risks knowing that the government will save them if everything goes wrong. The worst part is that this was not even an isolated case in recent American history, as something similar happened 15 years ago in the 2008 crisis, when the government granted a package of subsidies to banks and other companies affected by the subprime crisis. Justification for these subsidies was the same as for the Silicon Valley Bank, as the government claimed that the companies were important to the economy and that their bankruptcy could lead to an even more severe crisis. These tax incentives allowed the companies to maintain their operations and helped to avoid an even more severe economic crisis. However, various economists argued that the subsidies created a distortion in competition and benefited only the most powerful companies, leaving small and medium-sized enterprises aside. The initial purpose of state intervention in the economy is to create a win-win situation, where companies receive incentives from the government to expand their operations, and the population receives back the generation of jobs and also the availability of more affordable products or services due to business expansion. However, it is most common to see a situation where only one side comes out ahead, and normally it is that of the entrepreneurs and politicians responsible for the intervention who, as a thank you, receive support in their political campaigns. Usually in a state intervention, the wealthiest segment of the population comes out on top, while the majority loses, as these incentives are typically paid for by taxes, and those who pay for them are normally the weaker link in the economy, those who already have economic difficulties. But what about you? Do you believe that state intervention should be carried out as a way to stimulate the economy? Or do you believe that the government should let companies act and bear their own decisions? Leave your answer in the comments. Also, leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are not already subscribed. Also, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any news here on visionary businesses. And if you thought that large companies receiving subsidies from governments through taxes was already a perk, you'll also be interested to know that they still carry out elaborate maneuvers to avoid paying the taxes they should. Interested? Then I recommend that you watch the video that is appearing now on the card on your screen.